Welcome and thank you for joining us for another video in the series of the World Federation of Music Therapy Research and Ethics Commission for the 2020 to 2023 Council. I'm very honored to be joined today by two music therapists and researchers, and I'll just briefly introduce them to you. So Dr. Andeline Dos Santos is a registered music therapist. She holds a doctorate in music therapy and a master's of psychology from the University of Pretoria. She now co-directs the music therapy master's program at the University of Pretoria. Andeline is associate editor for Approaches and the Nordic Journal of Music Therapy. Her new book, Empathy Pathways, A View from Music Therapy, will be released in the next few months, so be sure to check that out. Nsamu Moonga is a music therapist and psychotherapist born and raised in Zambia. Nsamu earned a BA in psychological counseling from the University of South Africa and a master's in music therapy from the University of Pretoria. His music therapy experience spans health, medical, and school settings, and centers human development programming, design and facilitation, community infrastructure and social development, cross-cultural living and working. And Nsamu is currently a PhD student at the University of Pretoria. So we're going to take it away. Just going to open up the floor to talk a little bit about either one of you. Could you tell us a little bit about your research experience?
I'll let Nsamu go first.
Yeah, my research experience is very interesting. I need to mention that Andeline is my research supervisor, and so I'm in very good company at the moment. So that's very special. I mentioned that because I have learned through the whole process, first, that research is not something that one does in some lone, isolated dungeon somewhere, that research at every level is collaborative. And secondly, that research is work that is done, one, with the supervision of people that have been on the path already. So there's the support that comes with people that know what they're doing, what they're talking about, and they're holding your hand along the way. And secondly, one begins to learn the sensitivity of doing research. And you don't learn those sensitivities by doing research on your own. So there's always people that are going to be checking you as you go along, right? They slow you down when you're going too quickly, or they quicken you when you're going too slow, or they invite you to pay attention to what else is happening in the process that might not be in your focus at that particular moment. And for me, for the last 5 years, Andeline has been that, you know, from a research perspective and also from intellectual thought and engagement and stimulation. So there's been a lot of that happening because research, again, is not isolated from intellectual enterprise and engagement and asking not just interesting questions, but asking important questions about things that really matter.
Thanks, Nsamu. I think that is the exciting thing about, like you said, working collaboratively, that even if you're supervising someone, you're learning so much through their eyes and through their exploration of a certain topic. So I think I've learned as much from Nsamu as the other way around. My research interests from when I did my doctorate, I've been fascinated not only with certain topics in music therapy, but with methodology itself. That really fascinates me, how we explore what we're exploring and how we know what we know and why that matters. And when I came upon the idea of empathy, I mean, empathy is something in a sense that we all know about, and it's a word we use all the time. But the more you climb into empathy, the more you see what riches it holds. And for me, it sits so, in a fascinating way, it sits at the intersection between what we do as music therapists and what we do as researchers. Because when we are working with participants, trying to understand their worlds and their meanings and their experiences, we are required to be empathic as researchers. So research methodology in itself is an empathic enterprise. And so then we can study how empathy is working in a music therapy process with our clients and with us as music therapists, and we can look at what it means to do empathic research. So that really excited me when I thought about that. So my PhD was on the relationship between empathy and aggression in music therapy. And then after that, I've done some work on looking at empathy and spirituality, especially when music therapists and clients have similar or differing spiritual and religious orientations. And then now with the book coming out, I'm really interested in putting those ideas to work. And I've got a framework of empathy. I look at 4 different types of empathy, but now I'm busy embarking on a range of different studies to see how music therapists use those ideas, how I'm doing a study now with mothers with children with mental illness to give them some training around different types of empathy and explore how they work with that in the relationships with their children. So yes, I want to put these tools to use in the world and see how they function and what I need to think differently about and how they might be useful. So that's where I'm at in my research journey.
Thank you both for getting us started. I mean, I think what I see as a theme is the importance of, collaboration that started with Nsamu's discussion, right? And so collaborating with other music therapists, and there's definitely a trend in healthcare research, to also be collaborating with all of allied health and really learning from, the other disciplines as well as our own. And I would have to agree that having supervised a lot of research and engaging in a lot of research, that I very much agree with what Andeline had to say, is that I feel like it's a continually learning process for me as well, right? That I learn just as much. So interesting at what you were saying, Andeline, about your interest in methodology. I wonder if you could tell us, if you're able to, since you're embarking on these new studies, could you tell us a little bit maybe about the method that you've chosen?
Yes, so even in my PhD, starting there, I did a multi-paradigm inquiry where I worked with one group of adolescents and then a separate group, looking at the relationship between empathy and aggression, but then saying, if we situate that in different research paradigms, what then does that afford in terms of the type of questions we can ask, the type of data collection we might use, what analysis might look like. So in that study, I used descriptive phenomenology for the one group. And then I sort of blended a type of post-structural way of thinking, drawing on some theories from Deleuze and also Kenneth Gergen. So I did some rhizomic work and that kind of thing. So that really got me thinking. And as I then explored empathy further, I've been looking at how if we have an individualistic way of seeing the world where separate humans are the ontological foundation, and those separate humans then form relationships with one another. There's 2 types of empathy we can think about there. But then if we flip it and we have a relational ontology out of which separate humans come into being, even as Nsamu and I talk about our supervisor-student relationship, I become as a supervisor within my relationship with Nsamu. Without that relationship, being a supervisor doesn't even make any sense. So if we look at the world in these more relational terms, what does empathy look like then? So in the studies that I'm going into now, I'm also very interested in reflexivity and what empathic reflexivity looks like. So if we invested in exploring empathy with our participants, especially in studies where we might identify with them in some ways, what does reflexivity look like then, very practically? Because sometimes qualitative researchers will say, oh, I'm being reflexive, but we don't necessarily know, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? How did you go about doing that? And we don't want to create a recipe book because it's going to look different in each study. But I think there's ways of offering some more useful guidelines. So I'm also currently saying, okay, if I'm seeing the world in this more individualistic way, using this way of understanding, what would reflexivity look like there? And then maybe tools that sit more inside of interpretivist understandings or phenomenological ways of working work quite well. But if I'm working more relationally, then it's calling me to engage in the research differently too. And that's also where these kind of Deleuzian, rhizomic and relational constructionist types of thinking and working with data and even some more arts-based ways of working that force you out of the conventional boxes become very useful. So at each stage, I'm interested in, this is what I want to know. And then how do I want to know? And how do those puzzle pieces fit together in a way that the methodology has integrity?
That's, I mean, that's the cruxus of the good research, right? Is having a methodology that's going to help you answer the question that you so desire. And I mean, I really believe that some of the best research questions come from the work that we do, right? Why is something happening? Why isn't it happening? And that's how we get curious about exploring. So yeah, so motivational to hear you talk about empathy and something that has not been explored. So you definitely have made such a contribution already to the literature in that area. I'm going to flip it back to Nsamu. I wonder if you could tell us perhaps a little bit about research you've engaged in with respect to your master's, perhaps, or other.
I've been interested quite a lot with one, groups of people that have been objects of research for many, many years. And they rarely have been subjects of their own knowledge production and knowledge knowledge output. So I've been very interested for a while now with, and it's this thing for me of research being an inner interior inquiry of who I am and how I am happening in the world and how others in the world happen based on where they're coming from. I've been very curious about this, and part of that dynamic for me is that I'm speaking English at the moment. I'm not the first language speaker of the English language, right? So there's a lot of that influences how I engage with other people. So I've been very interested in giving, not giving voice, because that sounds really poor in thinking about it. I'm thinking about when I was investigating the place of music therapy in Vatonga, and I identify as Mutonga myself, a group of people that is predominantly within the Southern African region of Africa. And you find them in small portions in each of the countries like South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Mozambique, and Malawi. And in each of these, they seem to be quite minoritized because they're in small portions. And yet they've been studied for a long time. So there's a lot of scholarship that has come out of these areas, but very often as objects of study, and very rarely as interested parties and participants in the study themselves. So they participate in answering surveys, they participate in just giving out information, but that information is only for the use of the person who's been funded to carry out the research. So there's that, I don't know how to call it, the coloniality of knowledge that happens with people that have for a long time been objects of study, but never themselves being part of the study and defining their own phenomenon in terms that they can. I've been interested in that. And so let me say something about how music therapy then becomes a subject of interest for me. Because I came into music therapy based on my own very early and initial experience in the music, in community music and social music of the people, right? And I saw it from the time I was a child, how music was used, not so much for healing, but for galvanizing the community. You know, galvanizing the community for health and for coherence, for when people were unwell, there was a particular type of music that was performed. So I knew very early on that music could be used in these kind of contexts. And so when I was doing my training in music earlier, my research was based on the role of music in the healing practices of Vatonga. So I was already interested in the role of music in the healing practices that were existent. And so when I came to music therapy, I was interested in how that intersects with music therapy as I came to understand it through study. Right. So because there was this intuitive knowing of music therapy in the way that I was raised to see it and experience it in the community. And then there was the music therapy that I came to know through study and in organized clinical practice. And so I was interested in what was happening between these two and how they related and what was happening. And that's still the area that I'm interested in, you know, to mobilize music, you know, how traditional cultures, in this case, traditional cultures in Africa, use music therapeutically, and see how that then how that relates and communicates with music therapy as we know it. So that's my main area of interest for two reasons, really: to affirm, to use Andeline's word, you know, empathy, to bring empathy into the research and study, so that people can then see what they're seeing for themselves, you know, through their own eyes, rather than interpretations of what their knowledge and phenomenon might be, you know, by somebody else, somebody from outside.
Could I add on something there? Something that Nsamu said reminded me, we were also part of a project together. So we received some UNICEF funding a while ago. There's a unit at the University of Pretoria called Future Africa. It's a transdisciplinary hub that pulls together researchers from across the continent and is very invested in transdisciplinary approaches to researching and solving complex social problems. And UNICEF has been working with them, and they received some funds through UNICEF. So it was very exciting that the arts therapies now sit at the table in these sorts of spaces in the South African context. It's taken us a while, but I feel like we now are at a place where, you know, we get invited into these spaces as equal participants, which maybe sounds silly to some people, but for us still, you know, still get a kick out of that we can contribute as well as learn from others. And we were involved in a range of different projects there. And one of them was with teachers, one of them was looking at the community of practice with all different people working in the arts space in terms of social development and building networks and really examining how we understand arts and health in our context. But the project that Nsamu and I worked on together, it was called Shapeshifters. And there's a community outside of Pretoria called Easterist. During apartheid, people of color were moved into this area, not particularly willingly. And it's still a very under-resourced space. Lots of, you know, we can look at a community like that very holistically. There's lots of vibrancy, lots of music, lots of creativity, but also many struggles, a lot of unemployment, crimes and gang activity, drug use, etc. And so we facilitated a project with unemployed youth, with NEET youth who are not in employment, education or training. And it was about holding a space through the arts where these youth, you know, we didn't come in necessarily with an agenda. It was very much a participatory action research process to offer different arts-based processes of exploring, identifying what in their community was of concern to them, and to create just a space to ignite some of their own problem-solving capacity, of which there was much. And that was also a very exciting process to be part of. And it reminded me when Nsamu was talking about just creating space to listen instead of imposing our own agenda as researchers, and to hold a space where our participants have so much ownership in the process to say, this is what matters to us, and this is how we are going to use the arts to further our own agenda. And it's been also very exciting, and Nsamu's been more involved in this, but to see what has come out of those projects and how those participants have developed their own projects coming out of it, created their own spaces, pulled in their own participants. It's been very, yeah, very special to see that process unfold.
I mean, I hear, I was thinking exactly when Nsamu was talking that, you know, the research very much seems to be framed in participatory action research, right? So involving your participants right from all stages of the research process, right? And I do think that, you know, Nsamu, you highlighted some very systemic issues that exist in the music therapy literature and research, in terms of a lot of groups not particularly being represented, or in the methodology and how they are being represented, and who's actually sharing the knowledge, and not really who's interpreting it is not necessarily the people that are participants, right? And so definitely there is a shift. I'm hoping that will happen a lot quicker in terms of really involving participants in the process. And to me, I'm very much a phenomenological researcher as well, really wanting to understand how this experience is, if at all, beneficial, right? And learning more about it from the view of the participant and not from my own perspective. So it's a lot about perspective shifting, indeed. Yeah, I mean, that project sounds amazing that you got some funding for. I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit, either of you, about how other research maybe that has inspired you or motivated you. You both have wonderful motivations already, but I'm wondering if anything inspired you as you were thinking about your research agendas.
I want to go back to the Shapeshifters project, just to mention something there, because I think for me it's a huge motivation. It's a story that I like to tell, because something shifted for me in my understanding of what research is about, especially as a facilitator of knowledge generation, and also a mobilizer of people's collective intelligence and collective knowledge sharing. When it was time for us to tell the stories of what we found out, or not really found out, what happened in the processes that we were engaged in, we made a decision, as the holders of the space for them. We made a decision that we were not going to tell the story of the work that we did, that they were going to tell the story of their own experience, that they went through. And that was a huge change for me. It's huge because quite a lot of times research is packaged in very, very neat and tight ways by the researchers when the report is written, right? And sometimes it can be so removed from how the research itself happened and where it happened and the imperfections that are involved in there. But it's very well curated in the report. So what I'm reading is, now I realize that a lot of the reports that I read are not necessarily, I mean, and I'm not saying that there's falsity in the reporting, but the research is not necessarily as it is presented in a paper or as it is presented in a report. So now it raises questions for me about maybe a way of moving forward in doing research is that all the participants are part of the storytelling. They're part of of the reporting, that they can speak in their own voices in some way, shape, or form. So how then do we do research that is inclusive, that is participatory, not just in the process of data collection, but it's also participatory at the reporting level. So people can tell their own story about how they experience that particular project or research. And so that particular experience and it being a transdisciplinary experience was really, really important to me as a young and upcoming researcher on the continent of Africa, where our troubles are many, and a lot of the project, we are almost like knowledge consumers of what comes elsewhere, right? So it's wonderful to see the work of Andeline coming into production. It's coming into a book. So I'm like, yes, there's something coming out of the continent of Africa that is our own, right? Because up to this point, a lot of the knowledge that is generated in Africa is either overlooked in literature. Nobody reads what comes out of here because well, how do we really measure qualitative research? If it's only quantitative research, maybe we can have a look at it. But, qualitative research, first of all, is very suspicious. And secondly, qualitative research doesn't give us much clinical information that we can use in the work that we do. And yet, qualitative research offers room and space for people to tell their own stories, even though we cannot measure those stories. So I'm excited about, the future of Africa's center, because it offers the platform for researchers in Africa to begin to own our own research and to come into our own research with a lot of confidence that, yeah, we need to do research that works for us, and we can consume our own research.
I think for me, one of the exciting things in South Africa in the last few years has been, so there's an organization, the South African National Arts Therapies Association, and there's a strong sense of being a community of arts therapists, not just music therapists on our own. And it's always so enriching being with other arts therapies, colleagues, drama therapists and art therapists, because in many ways we share a similar language, but we also see things in slightly different ways. And it's just always such a wonderful experience having those conversations. And the drama therapists in South Africa their research is strongly based in a performance as research approach. And for me, I've always had the belief that in every single type of methodology, you get excellent quantitative studies and quantitative studies that are not necessarily so great, and arts-based studies that are amazing and ones that are not so great. It's not about the methodology. Inside each different way of knowing, there's ways of doing it excellently. And I think looking at the way that they engage in performance as research, and really what Nsamu was saying now, exploring stories, but in a critical way, in a situated way, that's been very interesting for me. I think in the music therapy space, it's not necessarily specific topics that inspire me, but there are researchers who don't just do things the way that they've always been done. They take, again, both a topic or a concept and the methodology, and say, does it really have to be this way? Or what does it look like in this context? And often flip things upside down. So, and in all spaces, like Lucy Bolgan, Katrina McFerrin, and then Evan Rood, and Brynjolf Stiger, and Mark Viega, and Hakeem Leonard, and Marisol Norris. There's so many different people who just have this mixture of critical thinking, but so much compassion and love for the work that they do. And they mix that together in with a strong social justice focus, the capacity to reflect and be critical of our own ways of thinking, be willing to step outside of the box, maybe ruffle a few feathers, but to do it with excellence and rigor. those are the people who really inspire me, like Becky Zarati as well, Marin Metal, who work in social disability stuff. Yeah, so I think I'm inspired by a range of different researchers, but it's the value system underneath what they're doing that really speaks to me and resonates with me, that there's such, maybe it does come down to social justice. There's real care about just thinking carefully about how we do the research that we do and the difference that it makes in the world, and being willing to push ourselves and ask tough questions, the willingness to be troubled, the willingness to have someone ask you difficult questions that make you feel uncomfortable and unsettle you. Those are the people I really like to hang around with. It's not always easy, but that's great because we want to be growing all the time. If we're not growing as researchers, what's the point?
Well, it's quite clear that you're both very passionate about your discipline and as well about advancing research. And I would have to agree strongly with Andeline that I think it's not necessarily about the type of methodology, but it's about how the study is carried forward and the rigor, because there can definitely be significant rigor in a qualitative study. And I very much resonate with what you said, Nsamu, about narrative. I mean, my PhD thesis use narrative methods to present the research. So I was very adamant that it was not my voice that needed to be shared. It was not my experience of dying, that, it wasn't my experience. I was the therapist that was privileged to be part of that. And I needed to ensure that it was their story that was told. And so for me, a way to accomplish that was to record all of the sessions, of course, with consent, and then transcribe all of them, so that I then had all of the direct quotes, and the words are coming directly from the participants, right? And that was very important in me, and in the research being authentic. And I do think that even though sometimes this qualitative studies, yeah, we can't necessarily compare them, but there are lessons that are learned, definitely, and experiences that are shared, that are communicated. And I think we learn a lot about how we engage in the work from that qualitative information. I think it's so valuable. So yeah, thank you both for sharing a bit more about what motivates you and your passions. I wonder, could you also talk a little bit, because you do work with other disciplines, how do you explain, music therapy research and outcomes to people who are not music therapists?
That's a tough one, right? And for me, that's why it's important for us to decenter, at least I can speak for myself. That's why it's important for me to decenter myself and center the stories of the clients that I work with. Because if it's left to me to tell my colleagues what music therapy is about, I will tell it in a particular way. And it might not necessarily be the experience of the clients that I work with. And I like the idea that I allow people to tell their own story of their experience of music therapy, right? And I'm very intentional about that. For example, somebody comes to me, I've had parents come to me and tell me, oh, well, so how does music therapy work? And I can talk about how music therapy works. I cannot speak for the experience of their person in music therapy, right? So I will say, well, I can tell you how music therapy works, the mechanics of how music therapy works, and the techniques and tools that I use in the work that I do. As for the experience and what happens after, I can only tell you what the client tells me, but I cannot give you a narrative of how this experience impacts them for the short term or for the long term. So they are able to tell you that if they want to. So, and because I don't want to presuppose what the impact of music therapy is for a particular individual. And I'm always conscious that I don't want to become a fundamentalist music therapist. So I need to be extremely humble about how I use music and how it influences other people. I don't want to make a claim and run around making all sorts of claims. But I can speak for what it does for me, you know. So I'm very, very careful. So on a team, that's exactly what I do. I will share what I think what works with music therapy, and then leave it out for other people to find out through other story sessions or in whatever settings. I've heard other people talking about their experience in music therapy in another context. You know, they speak well of their experience with me, but that's not me telling them.
I think for me, it's again been so fascinating being part of this UNICEF Future Africa process, to see shifting perspectives on how people are receiving and thinking about our work. Because at the beginning of this process, because it started off being quite COVID related, the funding was around COVID, and it was vastly transdisciplinary. We had medical doctors, environmental people, agricultural people, just really looking at health in a very multifaceted way, with a focus initially on the pandemic. And now the second phase has been related more to community development and women scientists and all sorts of things. And I think, you know, when you first walk into the room in that kind of space, you do get the impression of, oh, you know, they're the arty people, like, what are they going to bring to this process? And I've just learned over the years to firstly, like, I really believe in the value of the work that we do. And I don't need to enter those spaces apologetically, no matter what the impression from other people is. I can confidently be an ambassador for music therapy and the arts therapies in general, because we know the value of what we do and we've seen the evidence and we know. So firstly, to have your own self-confidence that your seat at the table matters and is valid. And then, you know, we actually have so many secret weapons as arts therapists, because we can talk about the evidence-based outcomes of the work that we do, you know, measuring impact. We can show videos that just captivate people's hearts, as well as not just cognitive information coming at them. You can't resist looking at a video of music therapy work and not be moved at what is happening. So in the end, I could see that there was an excitement when our presentation slot came along, not just because there was some entertainment value, but because people could see the impact, but also their hearts were moved. And yes, I think sometimes we undersell ourselves, or we anticipate that it's going to be harder to convince people, but we can just confidently share the work that we do. And if you do that and you build relationships and you're open to asking questions and you're open to listening to other people on multidisciplinary teams, those relationships form. And before you know it, people are seeing music therapy as an indispensable part of a project. And that's how it should be. So there's so much hope in that way for, well, the way that music therapy is developing in all different parts of the world.
That's amazing advocacy.
And I think what you're saying there, Andeline, it's believing in the work enough that I don't have to scream about it, you know, but I'm confident. I know how this works. I know it does. I don't have to shout at the top of my voice. If I'm confident enough, I can walk into a space and I can share my work. I can do all of that, and yeah, I find that fascinating. I've entered spaces that in more recent months that I never thought I would. You know, and that's been quite exciting, because in Africa, people tend to think, I don't know about in Canada at the moment. Do you, I mean? So I'm not sure, I don't know about here, but here in Africa, people almost like go about making assumptions about how music therapy. Everyone thinks, oh yeah, music therapy works, but yeah, that's fine. So, and then there's that almost easy assumption that is made. Yeah, I'm confident about music therapy.
And I think it's important there as well to say that that confidence doesn't mean that we have to come across having all the answers or being afraid to talk about struggles. There was a part in the one project we were doing, the community of practice. This was also part of the UNICEF project where initially, so it was with Sunel Fouchier and Marilise Swanepoel and a range of other people looking at the role of arts and health in South Africa. And we were initially going to use a framework, a British framework, to explore what those concepts mean and run focus groups with participants using the arts in all sorts of different social development spaces. And we started those focus groups and the participants said, but that's not how we understand the arts here. That's not what health means to us. And so in a report back session to UNICEF, I was saying, okay, we had all these plans, and then we had this delightful problem where we realized that our project was not going to work the way we thought it was. And we had to go right back to the beginning and say, okay, what do these terms mean in this context? How do the people on the ground here understand the arts? And start from square one. And that wasn't seen as, meaning that we didn't know what we were doing. It even turned out that the phrase delightful problem turned into some of the lingo that we use now, other people used as well. So I think we can have simultaneously a confidence in the work and also be upfront about what we're grappling with, what we're confused about, what we still don't understand. That's perfectly appropriate as well. And then we come across as real and genuine and fellow intellectual adventurers.
I definitely think, advocacy is really an international issue for music therapy, right? Where, Nsamu, you mentioned how music therapy and music is received. Where you are, certainly in Canada, music therapy is still somewhat of an adjunct therapy in many contexts, right? It's not core, it's not integrated into many healthcare locations where it should be. And I think having confidence and sitting at the table and being able to express what it is that we know, and it really resonates what you said, Andeline, we don't have to know everything. I don't think the other disciplines know everything either. And the people that we work with change. I think when I started working in long-term care 20 years ago, those people have changed. They're not the same clients that live in long-term care settings now. So I can't do the same things I did then, and I can't assume that the same issues or challenges are there. So research to me is a continual process. It's a continual curiosity about the work, and that's how we advance, I think, the profession. You both are so inspiring. I wonder if you could share a little bit more as we come to a close today, just about, why music therapy research is important and what kind of words of wisdom or inspiration would you have to people considering music therapy research?
I think music therapy research is inspiring because I can speak for myself. It's always surprising, and it's a way for me to test my own humility, my intellectual humility, my affective humility, and humility in all ways, right? Because of all the different dynamics that I come with, that I bring into many spaces, in communities where people are not highly academically educated, so they see somebody like myself with a particular eye, and so sometimes the onus is on me to carry myself in a certain way, to communicate in a certain way, so that people feel comfortable to let me in. there's something that I always think about, which is that taking the path of community engagement and the humility that has to go with that until people allow you into their own folklore. So when they start permitting you to enter their folklore, chances are that they are trusting you enough, because folklore is sacred. So there's this, yeah, so for me, research is really about my way of learning continuously to be humble, to sit back, to watch, to learn from others, because I'm not the expert in the room. By far, I'm not the expert in the room at all, you know.
I think for me, if I think of all the masters, the people who come and audition for music therapy masters training, I don't think I've ever, if we've asked them why they want to do this course, I don't think the answer has ever been because I want to do research. It's always because I care about people and I want to be a music therapist to bring about some change in the world. And yes, for some people, their path evolves and they land up in research. But I think all of us as music therapy researchers, we're in this field primarily because we love music and we care about people and we want to be participants in making some kind of good change in the world. And for me, that's what research is about. You know, we try to solve problems and build relationships and make stuff. And music therapy and human beings, we're so multifaceted that if we just have a few researchers doing things in their certain way, we're never going to adequately explore and sufficiently understand things to impact all the different clients that we could potentially impact. So we need all sorts of different researchers who understand the world in different ways and come from different places and have different ideas, some of which are in contradiction to other people's ideas, so that I guess it's like making a quilt, you know, we all have our little square and together create something that can be of service. And that's why we're here anyway. So for me, research is also a way of showing care. Even theory is a way of showing care. It's not just, yes, it's fun. Writing is fun and researching is fun, but we're so privileged to be in a field where we don't have to think so hard about how to apply our knowledge and what problem we're trying to solve. There's very real world pressing issues and struggles in people's lives that matter and that we get to be part of trying to find some solutions to with them and in collaboration with them. And that's such an amazing privilege to be part of. So that's why research very much matters.
Thank you both so much.
I want to say two quick things as well, following what Andeline said. I was thinking for myself also, research is a way of reaching to more people than I would if I was meeting people one by one in a clinical setting. So when my research is out there, somebody in Peru is going to read my research and somehow use my perspective or our perspective, whatever the form of research has been. They'll use our perspective to work with people in Peru. They'll use our perspective to work with people in Christchurch in New Zealand, right? So instead of just it being just one person at a time in a clinical setting, research has got a far much reach, a far larger reach. And also something that I find, because I'm a very curious person, I'm always curious about many things. I actually find that research is like a spiritual practice. There's a devotion about, you know, there's a devotion. There's the intensity of work and digging. It's like a psychological, intellectual mining that happens there until you find the core of that which has been sitting there and seeking explosion to come alive, right? So I find research to be something like that.
I think also for me, research is a conversation. And sometimes in academia, there's the idea of the famous solo researcher with the awards and the, yay, you. And then also if you were to say submit a journal article and it gets rejected and there's the whole, oh no, you know, what does this mean about me? Poor me, I'm being criticized. But research is a conversation. If you want to put some research out into the world, what you're doing is you're saying, I want to participate in the conversation. And so if it's like a family lunch and we're all talking about things, and then Auntie so-and-so says, no, I disagree with your political views. And then, you know, you don't feel like, oh, I've been criticized as a human. You chose to participate in the conversation. And what emerges between you all that none of you could have come up with alone is some spectacular idea that pops up between you. It's a relational endeavor. And that's been very helpful for me as well. You know, we're not on this as a solo quest. Yes, I'm passionate about my own ideas, and sometimes they feel like my own babies that I get to bring forth into the world, and I love them very much. But they're never just this isolated bubble. They popped up because I had a conversation with Nsamu or with you, Amy, or someone else. And so my ideas are also your ideas, and between us all, we create something of value. So we get to be in conversation together. And that for me is a really key part of what research is all about.
Very inspiring words. Thank you. I mean, when I teach research methods, I often talk to my students about finding, you know, choosing something that you're passionate about, that you're really curious about, because as Nsamu said, it is that you have to be dedicated to it, right? And at times it's not easy when you have recruitment problems or other things come up that, you know, you have to change methodology or things were different than you expected. And so it does require some resilience, but I love this framing of it being a conversation and contributing, right? And I think at the heart, I mean, that's why I went into music therapy. It's because I wanted to be in a profession where I could use something I'm so passionate about to help others. And so I continue to research as well to be able to advance what I'm doing, to understand, as you both have said, what it is that I'm doing, how can I possibly help, and to learn more about this wonderful tool that we have. Is there anything else either of you would like to say as we wrap up our conversation today?
I think for me, just thank you for, it's fun to talk about research. Thank you for the invitation to be part of this dialogue. It's felt nurturing, to be nourishing, to be part of this conversation. So thank you, Amy. And thank you, Nsamu.
Yeah, thank you, Amy, and thank you, Andeline. I'm thinking to myself, I've never had the opportunity to speak about research in this way, apart from the context of my, you know, research with Andeline and maybe a few other people. But to this grand scale conversation of research, I do speak about the clinical practice and all of that in other spaces. But this was exciting to speak about research and my place in it. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for accepting my invitation. I've been very privileged to speak to several researchers in my term here, and hopefully we'll create some more videos, and love learning about what everybody is doing around the globe. So thank you very much. And I hope that everyone has enjoyed our episode, and tune in. We'll have a new one up hopefully shortly. Thank you very much.